So welcome everyone. I am Jocelyn Ross. I am the Hands and Voices president of South Carolina chapter of Hands and Voices, and this is our first topic Tuesday for the year. I want to thank our captioner who is on. I have my screen share going, so you all should see the captions to my right. This is also helpful when I do record share, that it comes up with the captions right along for the replay video. So I appreciate everyone joining, and our presenters today will be Justine and Stephanie. If you're new to Hands and Voices and maybe didn't participate or hear about it, last September, we hosted our first Building Bridges family conference, Deaf and Hard of Hearing family conference in the Columbia area, and we had panel speakers. And so we got a lot of feedback with parent panels. We had young adult panels for deaf and hard of hearing. So for the new year in planning, we went ahead and polled our Facebook group and asked how do they want the topic Tuesday sessions to go, because often we did deaf and hard of hearing service provider organizations. And so it came back a mix. They wanted half and half to hear from parents and half from professionals. And so this year in 2024, we have a nice lineup of a good mix. And we're starting to spotlight with Justine and Stephanie, who are two new parents that have joined us in the Upstate area as our Greenville Upstate parent leads for our mingles. So I thought it would be awesome if we could spotlight them, if we had parents and guests who were new in the Upstate area. It was another way to get to know your parent leads. We'll share a little later, but they do have a mingle coming up this Saturday. So hopefully if you're in the area, you can go out to that mingle. So just a little bit of logistics. Again, I'm screen sharing, so we have the captions. Just a little bit mute logistic. Other than our presenters and our interpreters, we're going to ask that you turn off the camera and we'll turn it back on toward the end. This is going to be kind of an informal parent host presentation where I'll do a question and answer series with Stephanie, so you can get to know them through the questions and them sharing about their hearing loss journey. I sent out a brief information about both of their journeys and bio, but Stephanie is married and has 3 little ones, and 2 are deaf and cochlear implant users and have Usher's type 1. And Justine has a daughter, Germany, who is deaf, and they attend School for the Deaf and Blind. And between both of their stories, they're in mainstream classrooms or School for the Deaf and Blind. Their diagnosis is different. And that's really the unique thing about us getting together as families, because we all have a unique journey. We all have something we can share and contribute. We all have something, well, somebody can say, oh, I can relate to that, or oh, I didn't know that, and learn from each other. And so that's what these sessions are supposed to be about. So I'm going to minimize the just how to for our topic Tuesday agenda and get rid of that. But please pin your interpreter and presenters. I'll do that as well. And we will get started with questions. There's my light. Okay. So, and you all, this is informal, so just tell me if you're not seeing something, but you should be able to see the captions and your presenters. Okay, so I'm going to start with Justine. If you would just say hello to all of the participants. We have a good number tonight, and tell us about yourself and how you first learned about your child being deaf or hard of hearing, and any initial reactions or feelings.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Or is my sound on?
I can hear
Yes.
you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, I'm Justin, married with 2 kids, one hearing, which is Journey. She is 11 years old. And then I have a hearing son who is 9 years old. So when Journey was born deaf, but they didn't diagnose her deaf until she was about maybe 9 to 12 months old. That was our journey when she was born. She didn't pass the hearing test, but they was telling us, oh, it might be fluid in her ears, give it a couple more days, and then she'll do her audiogram. When she did her audiogram test, the doctor told us that she passed. At the minimum level, they was like she passed. At that time, I think the minimum was 25 and she made it 25. So they said they diagnosed her as hearing, but they never said that she had um, profound hearing loss until we continued to do more testing. So once we noticed that, we started. The doctors gave us programs for early intervention, and we got her started in an early intervention program for her to start school at the age of 2. They also recommended us for the cochlear implant. Now, a little quick explanation on why she was or how she was diagnosed with profound hearing loss. Her cochlears did not develop when she was in the womb. So all of that stuff we found out through more testing after she failed her audiogram that she had at the hospital. So moving forward, they told us how the cochlear may work for her right ear, but not for her left because her cochlear did not develop at all in her left ear. So we got her the cochlear implant in her right ear. So that was a shocking news to hear, even though we already had some idea that she was deaf because she was not reacting to any loud noises, sounds, or anything when she was an infant. We had family over to visit, celebrate, and all of that. And she would sleep through all the noise. So we suspected it, but we didn't get a final word until she was about between 9 to 12 months old for her hearing loss. So that was our journey when we first found out that she was profoundly deaf. We started getting resources for the early intervention and trying to find out how we can communicate with her because we were not exposed to sign language either. So we had to learn sign language because obviously that was the only way to communicate with her. So it was definitely a learning and challenging experience with raising Journey through her early stages.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Justine. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie if you would share about the um, hearing loss journey, your diagnosis, how you found out. Understand you have 2 children and at different ages, and so that may be different feelings when you're finding out a second child has hearing loss. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you and your journey and your feelings.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I have 3 daughters total. The oldest is deaf with cochlear implants, the middle is hearing, and then the youngest is deaf with cochlear implants. The oldest was obviously her first. So we found out right at birth at the newborn hearing screening that she failed. But similar to what Justin said, they kind of gave us hope that it was just some fluid in the ears or that, this kind of thing happens often. So we came back for a few follow-up visits. She continued to fail the test. We had no idea what any of that meant for a few months, even though, we were failing. We just didn't have answers. It was all very confusing. And so I'd say it was around 9 months when we finally found an audiologist who was able to get an test result to show that she had moved from she had kind of started with the moderate to severe loss that had progressed into a profound. So that was another reason they were a little bit confused for a little bit. So hers progressed essentially from the time she was born. It just kind of got worse and worse and worse. So she got bilateral implants. She had the first one done at 13 months. At the time, the FDA had a 1-year-old age where they preferred people to get implanted. So she was at 13 months, and then 2 months later at 15 months. She got a second implant. Shortly before she even had the implants, we had went ahead and started with a speech therapist, essentially an auditory verbal therapist. They go about the speech therapy side of things a little bit differently. It's more about teaching you to hear first and then kind of speak, which is a thing you have to teach them to hear. Even after they have their implants on, it's still different than how we hear. So they have to learn to hear that, scratches on the back door is a dog kind of thing. So you navigate all that those first few years too. So that's interesting. So she continued auditory verbal therapy through about age 5, kindergarten or so. She was doing really well. She is in a mainstream kindergarten class right now. She struggles in a few areas, but she's keeping up and she is doing well. We're very proud of her. She no longer is doing any of the auditory verbal therapy, and she gets a little bit of therapy through our public school because she goes to private school. So she is able to still receive speech through our public school system. So that's nice. So for the youngest, she failed the newborn hearing screening as well. I would say it was definitely an easier pill to swallow the second time around. You kind of totally understand what to expect, what's coming, you have a much better, I processed it a lot quicker with the second than I did the first. I would probably say it took a few years to navigate emotions and just a lot of things. With the first, with the second, you kind of just, well, for me, and mine are close in age. So I had been through it. I knew what to do. And so the second was a lot easier. We actually pursued to have this, our third child, we wanted to have both sides done at once. They were starting to approve this for kids. It was still kind of at first they said no. So I just kind of explored our options because from my experience, having our first child done the first side and the second side at 2 different times, she did extremely well at 13 months with that first implant and the recovery. But showing up at the hospital 2 months later, she had a concept of pain. She knew exactly where we were. And I just felt like the surgery and recovery on that side was a lot harder on her and us. And still to this day, she still prefers to wear one ear. So I've always been curious as to whether doing it twice, doing one at a time, affected that. It could just be her personal preference. She does wear 2 to school though. And then, so with the youngest, we asked to do 2 at once, and we found a doctor up here, Dr. Alexander, who agreed to do 2 at once. And he also agreed to do it younger than a year, which is very uncommon, but is becoming more of a thing. So she was bilaterally implanted at 9 months. So she had a pretty huge leap compared to my oldest. And I thought that would kind of give her an advantage as far as speech and hearing. But in hindsight, she's kind of progressing about the same. So I still feel like the 3 was a lot easier just doing 2 at once, but seems to kind of be following the same track. I'm not sure if it's just because we're doing a lot of the same things. I mean, they both are doing extremely well. Maddie is, the youngest, is in a deaf and hard of hearing preschool class where they are teaching her sign language as well as spoken language, which is extremely helpful because we didn't start learning sign language until recently. So we are still very new at sign language. And she is still in auditory verbal therapy. We did genetic testing after the first and found out that she had Usher's type 1, which essentially means that it causes hearing loss and it has the potential to cause vision loss in adolescence. So, and you just don't know if it's going to happen until it happens. So that is very uneasy at times, but it's just something we have to go with. We do get yearly testing for this specifically because if they do lose vision, it'll start with their peripheral vision and essentially just kind of narrow in. And they say it typically happens in your adolescence. So that is something that we just watch for and use precaution over. As of yet, neither one show any type of vision issues. So I don't have any experience as with anything on that side yet. We just kind of monitor it. I think that's about it.
Thank you so much, guys. Oh my goodness. I've been writing notes as I've been listening, and this is just the power of sharing because your questions come up, your aha moments come up. I mean, just hearing about your first child and your second, and just your feelings and being able to know more what to expect, the differences. And even just what was allowed with your first child and implantation after one, and then your second, that they were able to do it before one. My daughter was born in 2009, and so by that time, the newborn hearing screening was a mandate. But hearing loss, I feel in general, has been one of those industries that has advanced as it does more and more in the field. And just in you guys sharing your stories, hospitals have changed procedures where now they're implanting much younger. And you get that advantage with time and early access to language. For me, just like your child, Alyssa did her implantation at 2 different times. It was 2 and 3. So for her, she didn't have any awareness of it at that age. She was able to adjust fine with wearing both of them. But it just goes to show families that every child is different, every family is different. And what we can do is glean and get some insights, but you can't hold one scenario to the letter of this is exactly how it's going to unfold. We all have to do our own journey, but by listening and sharing, we can kind of get a gauge what to expect, maybe what to look for that we didn't know. So this was huge, you guys sharing that. And you kind of have touched on it some, but I do want to ask the question again, Justen, and I'll start with you again about your experience and access and resources and support for your deaf child. And your situation is unique because you actually relocated and we're looking at resources. And so sometimes that journey takes you that way where you feel maybe being closer to family is a benefit, etc. So I'll let you go ahead and start on that angle.
Yes, it was difficult in the beginning because you don't even know what resources to ask for. And a lot of things that is needed for a deaf child or the deaf and hard-headed community is not offered to you until you ask. So I think one of the things that was a challenge for me is trying to find out what my child need and how can I make sure she have it. So a lot of it I found out accidentally or at the last minute. And for example, we got the resources for early intervention that was given to us right away. But as far as once we noticed that she after she got her cochlear, she still wasn't vocal or using her voice. She can just hear environmental noise. So we still needed to communicate with her. So we had to find out how to learn sign language. But one of the issues that I experienced was having an interpreter for her at daycare. So when she was in elementary school, I say, well, not elementary school, I say maybe when she got out of preschool or kindergarten. She's getting older, trying to interact with kids, and there is no interpreter there. So I was starting to think about how is she, getting along in daycare. I know she had what she needs in school, but when she got out of school, there was a bus that took her to daycare. And then I started thinking about what she needed for daycare. So that was actually something I had to fight for because they was telling me that, hey, we don't have this. And I had to, with me, I was in the military at the time. So I had to um, start an investigation, pretty much write an investigation on, I forgot the name of the term at the time, but I had to submit it up to my chain of command to get them to investigate the situation and say, yes, she needs an interpreter. I had to provide the ADA Act and tell them why she is entitled to this and why she needs this while she's in daycare. So that was a long journey to go through because it did not happen overnight. It actually took 6 months for all of that to get into play. And that, I think most of the reason it took so long because of my lack of knowledge. So the resources was starting to happen as she gets older, and I start to think about what she needs. With her also being my first child, it was a lot of things I didn't know about having a child anyway, or what to look for. So I learned a lot um, with trying to find out what I need or what we can do to help her be successful. She started off in a mainstream school, which was very, very supportive. And then as I learned and started researching more about the deaf community, I wanted her to get into the school for the deaf. So after I retired from the military, we decided to move, and we moved here to South Carolina and got her enrolled in the school for the deaf to help her with not only just learning how to be fluent with sign language, but also her social and emotional skills, which was, some of the challenges that we had to face. And it was definitely hard, but we got over the hump and started to work with her instead of, trying to find what's easier for us, which comes to find out at the end was just to learn the deaf community and see what she needs.
Awesome. Stephanie, would you like to add about accessing resources and support and finding out services?
Yeah, luckily BabyNet really kind of caught my girls at the beginning. So that's offered between 0 and 3. And they are the ones who helped us get our auditory verbal therapy started and things like that. We also were close with the School for the Deaf and the Blind. So when we fell into BabyNet, they essentially linked us to them because of the diagnosis. And which was really confusing at first because they actually kind of recommended that our girls don't go to the School for the Deaf and the Blind if we wanted to pursue more spoken language rather than sign language at the time. And since sign language was not our primary language, we just essentially chose spoken language. And so that's why we just followed the trails of mainstream classes. We did the public 4K class for Marley, my oldest, and she did well. She kept, but there were challenges. They offered everything. Honestly, our public school system was extremely above and beyond with the services they offered and accommodating, but extremely large school, large class, large lunchrooms, very loud stimulation. In the evenings when she'd come home, she would just be, she just was hard all day on her. So that's why we made the decision to try private school with her. So that's very, very small, and she seems to be doing much better with that. So we're blessed to be able to do that for her right now. And so they've always had good access to anything we've ever needed here in our area, which I'm extremely grateful for. And I'm still extremely grateful for the School for the Deaf and the Blind, because as they age, we'll be able to, if that is needed, we can use that. And we are still able to use a lot of their services, which I appreciate.
That is awesome. And you guys are in the upstate area, but services really across the state are different. And that's another plug to why it's important to get together with a support group. Stay connected with us on our Facebook parent group page, because as you're looking for resources and you're trying to see what your school is offering, it is welcome for you to post something and say, hey guys, how are you getting an interpreter in your school? What services are you getting? Because sometimes it helps to have other examples of where it is happening to encourage your case if you want something in your school system or access, or maybe you didn't even know something could be done. To put a question out to the group and say, hey, my kiddo is turning this age, it's a transition year. What hard of hearing services do you have? And we have great networks in South Carolina between Beginnings SC, School for the Deaf and Blind, Early Intervention Services, BabyNet, and we have all of those professionals to help along the way. But it still is on a parent's journey to do your research and verify. It was to say, and trust and verify, because as Stephanie mentioned, you can have one person give a lens and say, well, maybe you don't want to do this if you want that, and so forth. So when you get your information, you trust and verify, check resources, see other people who have used something, and that all helps you feel validated for the choices that you make. Because our motto with Hands and Voices is what works for you is what makes the choice right. So everybody is doing their journey and we can take little snips and pieces from it, but ultimately we have to be comfortable with why we're making decisions and carry through for decisions. And even sometimes when we pivot from our decisions and say, okay, well, I've given this 150%. I really feel like I've tried this way. You've documented it, and maybe you have to pivot. And that's another reason why we like being hands and voices, because somebody's journey, just like Justen, you could start and cochlear implant may be an option, but you still need to do ASL. So you don't want to isolate with one group, and you may need the next group later on. So we like being that umbrella and just being exposed as a full community with services. I know I'm getting so much from this. It's 7:30. I'm going to ask you one more question, but I want to encourage participants that if you have something come up, ask it in the chat. And after this question, I'm just going to open it up and ask everybody to turn on their screen and give more of a dialogue if there are any questions. If not, I can go on with more. But already just by listening to you guys, it's so much that's popping in my head. But I did want to mention too, as we talked about feelings, that Brene Brown is good because emotions can come with the diagnosis. It can come with a kid bringing that first A home that maybe you didn't think your child would be there with that success and so forth. And it's so many things that make you feel these different feelings of grief or happiness or anger. So I just put that out there as a resource for you to be okay with emotions. I journal. I don't have the best memory. And so a girlfriend told me to kind of journal and do one fact and one feeling. And so I have two kiddos. So I try to, when I can, do a fact and a feeling about each of my kids just to have for me. And it's just good to just get your feelings out through the process because it can be overwhelming. Like you said, Justine, it was 6 months that you were fighting with trying to prove your case of why your child needed services and so forth. And so advocacy is definitely needed, but it can be a hard process. And so having support and being in a support group such as ours, where we can encourage each other and say, keep it up. I see it working for you. It will take time. Or, hey, you're coming up on this. Maybe plan, because I know it can take months before a service because everything just doesn't happen overnight. And so we can get these insights by talking and sharing with each other. So I would turn it back over to you, Justine, and ask, what advice would you give other parents who've just found out about their child being deaf or hard of hearing, and what you wish you would have known earlier?
That is a good question. And, I think about this question all the time, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to be a part of the South Carolina Hands and Voices. My advice that I will recommend any parent, like first thing you mentioned before, everybody's journey is different, but as far as advice, when you experience your child with hearing loss, one thing I wish I would have did earlier instead of waiting on a final word was to start with sign language early. We didn't know sign language, but we learned. And I know one of the things that was complicated, or I always ask myself, how can I learn sign language and teach my child sign language at the same time? Even though it was challenging, it was rewarding in the process because it can be done. You have to make that time. I started off with reading books. That's how we started learning sign language, reading child books. Um, so that's one of my number one advice is if you're experiencing hearing loss with your child, or if your child is diagnosed with hearing loss and they are not dependent, no matter what their diagnosis is to start off with sign language, because it once we was able to teach her, or once she started learning sign language, it made it easier for her as far as being able to express what she needed and what she wanted to do. She was very into routine. So once she started to understand that sign language was her way to communicate, it helped a lot of or prevented a lot of temper tantrums that we were having in the beginning, frustration, rejection, all of that. And I think if we would have started a little bit earlier, knew what we was getting into, it would have made the process a little bit easier. So that's my number one tidbit to take away is to learn sign language.
Okay, awesome. Stephanie?
I'd definitely kind of roll off of that as well. I would definitely go ahead and learn it. Even with the implants, at the end of the day, they're deaf. And there's times that they don't have the implants on and you still need to communicate. And as they're getting older, that is something that we need. And at first in the beginning, when they said, oh, she'll get cochlear implants and they'll hear, that in my mind, I wrote off sign language. I was like, okay, we don't need that. And then when they said, oh, they might lose their vision, that was like, okay, I'm not going to bother with that, But here we are, and now we are trying to catch up, which is no big deal. We are, but it would have made life a little bit simpler, I think, to have done it a lot earlier. And another piece of advice is the parent groups really help, like having your parent connections. I go to our support team for a lot. So like our therapists and stuff and doctors. But to be honest, I get the best answers from other parents who are in the life, living it. So I would say these parent contacts are the best thing you can do. Just make as many as you can and keep a relationship and, communicate. And I think that's how you'll have the best success.
Awesome. I'll chime in and say my daughter had the hearing aids first and then progressed to profoundness. And so at 2 and 3, she got her cochlear implants, and we did through the auditory verbal route. And like you said, they wanted you to depend on just listening versus visual. And so ASL kind of was a secondary. It was, like you said, Stephanie, possibly not needed. It wasn't necessarily encouraged with doing AVT. And once you do go on your journey, like you said, they are deaf. Without the devices on, they're deaf. And we were actually doing signs at home for bath time because the devices wouldn't be on at bath time. So we found ourselves kind of weaving our own family signs to try to understand when it was those processes without the device, because they don't wear them 24 hours. They should rest and not have them on at nighttime. And so it was maybe we should go back to learning ASL, because I remember the day when her devices did not work and we had no way of communicating with her for 2 days until we could get new devices sent. And that was a hard pill to swallow. And then fast forward, now she's gone to deaf and hard of hearing camps. and she's exposed to other kiddos doing it, and she's picked up the language. Fast forward to she's about to go to high school, and they recently just approved ASL as a foreign language, which I'm excited about. And I would love for her to get that natural ASL language, and colleges are picking it up. And so I don't know if some of not learning ASL maybe had some of that trajectory of there are not many people you would sign with, but it's still a part of their culture with them being deaf. And I love exposing her to it. And she has really gravitated toward it. And I encourage you, we'll post it, a reminder again, and it's on our website. But we post all of the old Topic Tuesdays, and we had two recent college grads who spoke because they were speaking about their assistive um, dogs, their walk assistive medical dogs, and how they had experiences in college with not having the device on, but the fire alarm went off in school, or living independently in an apartment, and somebody tried to break into the room, and it was their assistive dogs who helped them with the hearing without the aids on. So not to say to scare you, but to prepare and just think about those questions, because Alyssa's going to high school, and I think about post-secondary and what will be her supports in school when she doesn't have her device on. And so, as you mentioned, the parent group is awesome. We love our professionals. We get a wealth of information for them. But our families and what we go through on our journeys often give you questions to ask yourself and kind of figure out aha and maybe further things to explore. We don't have an Instagram page. We just do the Facebook. That was one question that was posed. So we have a public Facebook page, and then we have a private Facebook group. And we're working now to get all of the contacts, because they're different area mingles that have popped up, whether it's ASL groups that are meet for like a coffee and tea time, or parents in this area that connect, and some of them do Instagram. And we're always working to try to build so that you all know every organization out there in South Carolina for resources, but definitely get connected with the parent group for help.